The Drum, the Doll, and the Zombie by John Bellairs and Brad Strickland, Chapter 9. Nothing more happened that day, nor the next one. Grandma had perked up quite a bit, though, and Major Dixon began to look more cheerful. He and Johnny had a couple of chats about what each other had been doing over the past several months. Major Dixon said that regardless of Johnny's decision, he and Johnny would vacation together next summer, and they spent some time dreaming up places they could go. Meanwhile, Johnny kept an eye open for any sign of activity at the professor's house, but he saw nothing out of the ordinary. Professor Childermass was at home. Johnny saw him coming out to collect his morning paper on both Saturday and Sunday, and his maroon Pontiac stayed parked at the curb in front of his house. And Johnny saw no sign of Father Higgins' big Oldsmobile. Fergie spent both Friday and Saturday nights. During the day, he and Johnny practiced throwing and catching a football in front of Johnny's house. It gave them the opportunity of keeping the professor's house under observation without seeming to spy on it. Johnny was lousy at sports. He was not well coordinated. So many boys didn't even want to play catch with him, but Fergie didn't mind, and since Fillmore Street was always very quiet, they could stand right out in the street and pass the football back and forth. Their stakeout paid off Sunday evening. Like most boys their age, Johnny and Fergie had a tendency to put off homework until the last minute. Fergie had a big test in Latin coming up, and he was not very good at it. Johnny, whose average in Latin had never fallen below an A, offered to help him review, so the two spent a couple of hours that afternoon running through noun declensions. At about 8 p.m., Fergie heard a car outside and got up to look out the window. "It's Higgy," he said in an excited voice. "Come on, John, baby, it's time to fish or cut bait." Johnny didn't know exactly what that meant, but he closed his book, grabbed his jacket, and followed Fergie. His dad and Grandpa were in a deep game of checkers, and Grandma was in the kitchen humming to herself. Johnny casually waved to his grandfather, knowing that the old man would think he was just walking Fergie partway home. Grandpa barely noticed, and then, with a triumphant grin, he made a double jump on the checkerboard. The two boys walked onto the porch, just in time to see the professor's door close as Father Higgins went into the house. "I bet they're getting ready to go right now," said Fergie. "What a break." "What are we going to do?" asked Johnny, feeling cross. "Sneak into the house and spy on them?" "Nope," said Fergie in a smug tone. "We're going to stow away. Come on, Dixon, we better move fast." They loped across the street. Hardly anyone in Dustin Heights ever locked his car, so when Fergie tried the back door of the Oldsmobile, Johnny was not surprised that it clicked open. Fergie climbed inside and hunched down on the floor behind the front seat. "Come on," he whispered, and closed the door carefully, feeling like a fool. Johnny got onto the back seat floor and pulled the door closed without making much noise. "Now what?" whispered Johnny. "Now we wait, John baby. If they're going anywhere, they'll be out in a few minutes. And if we just sit tight and quiet, they'll haul us along with them." Fergie's cocksure attitude irritated Johnny. "What if Professor Childermass drives his car, smart guy?" he asked. Fergie snickered. "Not a chance. You know what a rotten driver he is. And so does Higgy. Nope. If they're going anywhere, it'll be in this car. So all we got to do is keep from being seen." "I got it all." "Shh." The professor's front door opened. The two figures emerged. They came toward the car, and Johnny scrunched down, making himself as small as he could. Sure enough, in a second, the passenger side front door opened and someone got in, making the car settle a little on its springs. And a moment later, the driver slid behind the wheel. You have everything you need, don't you?" asked the professor's raspy, crabby voice. "For the last time, yes, and yes," said Father Higgins peevishly. The engine started, and as the car pulled away from the curb, the priest said, "Rod, I hope you know what you are doing. It seems like a long shot to me." The professor snorted. "A long shot, my foot. Look, Higgy, all my research shows that the voodoo doll gains power if it is kept in a place of death until it is ready to be used. Well, what places of death do we have around here? I'll tell you, the funeral parlors and cemeteries. Now, it doesn't seem likely that Mama Sinestra has taken up residence at any of our local mortuaries, so that leaves the cemeteries, where the power of Baron Samedi, Lord of the Dead, is at its greatest. That is why I asked you to find out if anything suspicious had been noted in or around our local boneyards." The car was moving steadily now, and the ridiculous report about a bear prowling through Rest Haven Cemetery is your so-called lead. And that ridiculous report about a bear prowling through Rest Haven Cemetery is your so-called lead? Fergie tapped Johnny's knee in an "I told you so" kind of way. Professor Childermass sighed deeply. "That was no bear, as you well know. Think, Higgy. The woman said she saw a black shape, squat and heavy, and shuffling. Who fits that description? Mama Sinestra, agreed Father Higgins, his reluctance evident in his voice. Exactly. And isn't Rest Haven the logical place? I mean, the Dixon family does have relatives buried there, and that is where Henry and Kate have their plots. So do half the Catholics in town, said Father Higgins. Anyway, we'll soon know, because here we are. I got the key to the gates from the groundskeeper. Should we unlock them and drive in? Heavens, no, replied the professor. You were in the army long enough to know the value of surprise. We'll park at the curb and then go inside on foot, since the doll needs constant attention until its charm is exactly right. Mama Sinestra must have settled it someplace that gives her protection from the elements. That means a mausoleum, and there are only half a dozen or so. We'll check them out one by one until we find the old hag and give her holy hopping what for. Father Higgins parked beneath a streetlight. Johnny squinched himself into as tight a ball as possible, and he could see that Fergie was doing the same. They need not have worried, because both Professor Childermass and Father Higgins were far too excited and preoccupied to notice them as the two men slammed the car door shut and walked away. A few seconds later, Fergie said, "Peek out your window, Dixon, and see if the coast is clear." Cautiously, Johnny raised himself enough to peer out. He could see the black wrought iron fence that ran around the cemetery. It was about 10 feet tall, and every 10th rail was a foot again taller than that, with a decorative spear tip end on it. Through the rails of the fence, Johnny could just make out glimmering white oblongs of marble headstones. The glimmering white oblongs of marble headstones in the darkness. He saw no sign of the two men. "They must have gone in," he said. "Let's go." Fergie and Johnny crept out of the car and walked to the front gate of the cemetery. Fortunately, Father Higgins had not locked these behind him, and the boys slipped through, though the old hinges did groan a rusty protest. "Rats," muttered Fergie. "I should have thought to bring a flashlight. Why aren't there any lights in this place?" "Who'd need them?" asked Johnny. He felt uneasy and excited, as if something awe-inspiring but terrible might happen at any second. He gazed around, but at first all he could see was the vague blur of headstones. Only a little stray light from the street lamps penetrated this far into the graveyard. Then Johnny caught sight of a moving gleam just over the crest of a hill. He croaked, "Hey, there's a light over that way." He and Fergie hurried up the hill, and as soon as they got to the top, they spotted the shapes of two men walking slowly among the tombstones. One of the men had a flashlight, and the boys followed its wavering yellow beam at a respectful distance. Walking was difficult because Rest Haven was an old cemetery, and the gravestones were crowded together. Johnny had served as an altar boy for St. Michael's, and he had assisted Father Higgins at 4 or 5 funerals here, so he knew his way around. He and Fergie drew closer to the light until they were just near enough to hear the thin voices of Father Higgins and the professor. Right now, the professor sounded testy. "Well, of course I didn't expect to find it first crack off the bat. Come on, Higgy, where's the next one? Don't call me Higgy, Rod. You know I hate that. And I hate being called Rod, Higgy. Come on, and the faster you tell me where the next mausoleum is, the faster we'll be out of here." "The Famagusta family mausoleum," muttered Father Higgins. "Just over this way. Don't fall over the headstones." The two men came up to a big marble mausoleum that was almost the size of a small house and designed as a miniature Greek temple. 4 Corinthian columns supported the rectangular entrance. 4 Corinthian columns supported the rectangular entablature beneath the pediment, which was triangular. A small stone angel guarded each corner of the triangle. The two on either side bore swords, and the one on the peak was stretching her arms high over her head, carrying a wreath. Carved into the marble of the pediment was the single word Famagusta. Johnny knew all these details from memory because it was far too dark to see them right now. He fleetingly wondered if the dead people inside the fancy mausoleum were related to the caretaker of St. Michael's. If so, the family had fallen on hard times because Mr. Famagusta was as poor as a church mouse. Then Johnny heard Father Higgins gasp. "Look at this," he said. "Why, the door has been tampered with. Someone sawed the padlock off." "As I predicted," replied the professor, dryly inspecting the bar and the heavy bronze doors. "Now, if you have quite finished alerting whoever is inside to our presence, let's get on with it." Ha! The professor must have yanked the metal door open hard because it clanged with a noise that made Johnny jump a mile. "Good God, Roderick!" shouted the priest, but his voice sounded more irritated than alarmed. A little more of that and you'll awaken those Famagustas and all their neighbors. Sorry, muttered the professor. Nobody home, it seems. But just take a look inside here. There are some empty tins of canned heat, and there are some worn old blankets in the corner. Someone has been sleeping in this mausoleum. Sleeping temporarily, I mean, not eternally. Fergie squirmed beside Johnny. I can't see a thing, he complained. Come on, Dixon, let's circle around. The two boys picked their way cautiously until they could gaze in through the open door. Johnny felt the hair prickling on his neck and arms at the eerie sight. Inside the mausoleum, coffins lay on shelves. Father Higgins stood with his back to a whole wall of them, shining his flashlight down so that the coffins were just indistinct shadowy forms. The professor knelt on the floor, rummaging through a pile of tattered brown army surplus blankets. Aha! They heard him cry. He held up something small and blue. Father Higgins, you may offer your sincere apologies any time you wish. Here it is. Fergie made a squealing, stifled noise, and Johnny looked at him. He could barely see Fergie's face in the dark, but his friend seemed terrified as he stared with wide eyes into the mausoleum. Johnny looked back. Something was stirring in the darkness behind Father Higgins. Someone or something. One of the coffins behind the priest swung open slowly and silently, and then the body inside it sat up. Run! Screamed Johnny from the top of his lungs. Professor, Father, run! There's a zombie behind you! And that is the end of chapter 9.